everyone, welcome. Thanks for coming. Today we're going to talk about why we read Akeidat Yitzchak on Rosh Hashanah. I know that we're already past Rosh Hashanah, but I hope that what we learn today and discuss today will help shape our mindset a little bit more for the rest of us starting Tshuva and for Yom Kippur. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is take a look at source number 1, which is the Sefer Hashanah. And he's going to talk about the mitzvah, why we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, which is going to relate to our question. This is really in the context of why we blow the shofar on Yom Kippur of the Yovel year, the 50th year. And then he's going to say the reason for that, and then he's going to transfer how that's different on Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so I'm going to read that. We'll start with the Yovel part, and then we'll go into the Rosh Hashanah part. And your task as I'm reading is to think, as we're reading this, is there anything surprising to you that the Sefer Hashanah says? Okay, so we're in source number 1. So mitzvah tekiyat shofar b'yom ha'kippurim shel Yovel. Right, he's talking about the mitzvah of blowing shofar on Yom Kippur of the Yovel year. L'tol v'shofar ba'asiri v'tishrei shu yom ha'kippurim shene'emar v'havarta shofar t'shuvah v'gomer b'yom ha'kippurim taviu shofar b'chol artzachem v'gomer v'kratem dur v'gomer. He's just quoting the pasuk that tells us that we should be blowing the shofar on Yom Kippur. V'yadua shemitzvah ha'tekiya b'yom zeh hi lefarsim teiru kol eved ivri she'yatza ben chorim b'li damim. And the reason why we're blowing is in order to announce, to make known that all eved ivris, all the Jewish slaves, should go free in the Yovel year for free without having to pay. All the slaves go free. Okay, now pay attention to this. See if you see anything surprising. This is different than why we blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah. We blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah in order to direct our minds towards Akeidat Yitzchak, in order to create desire in ourselves to be like Abraham in his love and his commitments and loyalty to Hashem. So the Sefer Hashanah is saying is that we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah in order to direct our minds to Akeidat Yitzchak, so that we'll be inspired by Abraham to be as committed and loyal as Abraham was to Hashem, to do tshuva. And presumably we can apply the same reason to why we actually read the story of Akeidat Yitzchak on Rosh Hashanah, that it should be for that same reason, to inspire us to be as committed to Hashem as Abraham was. So do you find anything surprising in the Sefer Hashanah statement? Okay. It's okay if you don't, because that was a trick question. I didn't find anything surprising either at first. But actually, the more I thought about it, the more I started to doubt that reading about Akeidat Yitzchak on Rosh Hashanah can actually accomplish this goal that the Sefer Hashanah says. Why is that? I'll tell you the story. Right now I'm finishing up a master's degree in Jewish education at Israeli. And this past summer I heard a story from one of my teachers, Rabbi Chaim Feuerman. And he told us that he was in this seminar to learn how to teach others to be presenters. So the instructor was teaching his students how to teach others how to be presenters. And he said one of the most important things when you are teaching others how to be presenters is to make a mistake. You should mess up at least one time. And he said, as he called it, you should do imperfect teaching. You should mess up. It's like, what? What are you talking about? That's so strange. Why should you purposely make a mistake? He explained that if you go up in front of people who you're trying to teach a new skill, and you do it absolutely perfectly, you are this charismatic, dynamic presenter, everyone's going to be really impressed by you, and they'll put you on the pedestal. Oh, this is like the best presenter ever, but I can't possibly do that. That was so perfect, so amazing. I can never do as good as that person, so I have no hope, and I'm not even going to try. And so now let's think about Abraham. If you look at source number 2 from the Moreh Nevuchim, he describes what Abraham, what he went through, what this act of Akeidat Yitzchak was to him. He says, Abraham is commanded to perform a certain act which is not equaled by any surrender of property or by any sacrifice of life, for it surpasses everything that can be done, and belongs to the class of actions which are believed to be contrary to human feelings. He had been without child and had been longing for a child. He had great riches and was expecting that a nation should spring from his seed. After all hope of a son had already been given up, a son was born unto him. How great must have been his delight in the child! How intensely must he have loved him! And yet, because he feared God and loved to do what God commanded, he felt little of that beloved child, and set aside all his hopes concerning him, and consented to kill him after a journey of 3 days. Okay, so Abraham, who had waited years and years and years to have a child, and then finally, his dream was fulfilled. A son was born to him, and soon after, God tells him, you should kill him. So such a difficult decision, an impossible decision for us to even think about that Abraham would go through, but he does it. He does it because he fears God, and you could, in your own time, you could read the rest of the Rambam here, where he, even more emphasized the greatness of Abraham's decision in his following God. So I don't know about you, but I think Abraham would be an example of perfect teaching, right? Someone whose actions were so amazing and something to so look up to that when I see them, I say, wow, that's amazing, but I can't possibly be like Abraham. I can't possibly even, think to be on that same level as Abraham. So rather than Abraham perhaps being an inspiration for us on Rosh Hashanah to do tshuva and be as loyal and committed to Hashem as he was, it's almost like a downer. Like, I'm trying here to do tshuva. You see this model of someone who was so close and committed to Hashem that you can't possibly be like. It's like, why am I even here? Why am I even trying? I can't possibly reach that level. So what I want to do today is to think more carefully about what the Sefer Afinach is saying. What exactly is the message of Akeidat Yitzchak? Why exactly are we reading it on Rosh Hashanah? And how can it be an inspiration to us? So the first, logical place to look, if you turn over your sheets, the source number 3. Is the daily shachar, every single day in davening. A lot of people don't say it, but it's part of the davening right after Berger HaShachar. We actually read the narrative of Akeidat Yitzchak. And then there's an introductory and concluding paragraph before and after the narrative. And it's a good place to start off to look to see, why are we reading this? What is the message? Look at source number 3. We say, Elokeinu v'Elokei Avotinu, Zacharinu b'zikaron tov lefanecha, ufatinu b'fkudat Yeshua v'rachamim mishmei shmei kadam. So we say, God, please remember us for good before you, and remember us to, save us and have mercy on us. V'zchor lanu Hashem Elokeinu ahavat hakadonim Abraham Yitzchak v'Yisrael avadecha, et habrit v'et hachesed v'et hashvuah shenishbata l'Avraham Avinu b'Har Moriah, v'et ha'akeidat she'akad Yitzchak b'no al gavei hamizbeach ha'katuv b'Toratacha. And you should remember the love of the early ones of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and remember the brit, the covenant that you made with them, and the chesed, the kindness that you did to them, and the promise that you made to Abraham at Har Moriah after Akeidat Yitzchak, which was that he should, have descendants, and they should multiply and do well, and everyone will bless themselves by their name. And remember the Akeidah that Abraham did, that he was willing to sacrifice Yitzchak on the Mizbeach. Okay. So we have it there saying that we're reading Akeidat Yitzchak to remind Hashem of the brit and the chesed and the shvuah that he did and made with our forefathers. Let's look at the paragraph after the Akeidah. Ribono shel olam, kemo shekavash Avraham Avinu et rachamav la'asor ritzoncha b'libav shalim, ken yichbashu rachamecha ka'asacha me'alinu, ve'agol rachamecha midotacha. So we say, God, please, just as Abraham suppressed his mercy in order to do your will, so too you should suppress your anger, and instead show us mercy. ותנהג עמנו השם אלוקינו במידת החסד ובמידת הרחמים, ובטובך הגדול ישוב חרון אפך מעמך, מעירך, מארצך, מנחלתך. And you should be, act towards us with kindness and with mercy, and in your greatness you should turn your anger away from us, from your nation and from your land and everything. וקיים לנו השם אלוקינו את הדבר שהבטחתנו בתורתך על ידי משה עבדך כאמור, וזכרתי את בריתי יעקב ואף את בריתי יצחק ואף את בריתי אברהם אזכור בארץ אזכור. And you should, fulfill the promise that you made through Moshe, that you should remember the brit that you made to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Okay, Okay, so I think what he's saying here is a little confusing how it's worded in this tefillah, is that just as Abraham suppressed his natural feeling of mercy towards his son, towards Yitzchak, and was willing to slaughter him because Hashem told him to do so, so too we're asking Hashem to suppress his natural feeling of anger when we sin, and show us mercy instead. Right? It's natural, it makes sense that Hashem should be angry at us when we sin, but just as Abraham was able to suppress his natural feeling of mercy towards his son, we're asking that Hashem also suppresses his natural feeling of anger towards us when we sin, and instead show us mercy. Okay, so what it seems to be from here is that the reason why we read Akeidat Yitzchak, and source number 5, we won't read it inside, but it's from the Zichronot section of Musaf of Rosh Hashanah, which is basically these 2 paragraphs put together in one. So we see these same messages that we say every day in Shacharis are also, we also say them on Rosh Hashanah itself. It seems that the reason why we read Akeidat Yitzchak on Rosh Hashanah is not a message to ourselves. Okay, we're kind of avoiding the question. It's not a message to ourselves, rather it's a message to Hashem. We're reading Akeidat Yitzchak so that Hashem, so to speak, will hear and remember, everything that He promised us. That's really, shown by Akeidat Yitzchak, that Abraham was so committed to Hashem, and Hashem made these promises to Abraham. And he'll remember this, and he'll do good for us. So, based on these sources, we're totally avoiding our original question. Akeidat Yitzchak doesn't have to be, an inspiring message to ourselves. Rather, it's a message to Hashem. Hashem, hear these, remember Akeidat Yitzchak, and please do good to us. Alternatively, you can also kind of see it as a message, as like a comforting message to ourselves. If you're kind of on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, you're thinking to yourself, I have no hope, I don't know how I can do tshuva. You could kind of see that as comforting, that we have something to fall back on. That even if, you think your own merits won't allow you to accomplish tshuva and be, chosen for the book of life, we have, the zchut of our forefathers to fall back on. Okay, so that's one possible answer. A second answer, I read in an article by Rabbi Jackner, Teaneck. He was actually quoting a sermon of Richard Schultz of Teaneck, maybe some of you know him. And he points out that in the Torah, Rosh Hashanah is only referred to as Yom Truah, like this day of we blow the shofar. And it's Torah Shabbat Peh that calls Rosh Hashanah Yom Hadin, right? That adds this aspect to the day of that it's a day of judgment. And so he says that the Torah reading, therefore, emphasizes this theme of judgment. Right? Abraham, who was tested this much to see if he would follow Hashem, that emphasizes the judgment aspect of this holiday. He says that we see this on Shavuos also. Shavuos in the Torah is not ever called the, Zman Matan Torah, the day that we got the Torah. It's just referred to as this agricultural holiday. And it's Torah Shabbat Peh that adds on this aspect of Zman Matan Torah that tells us that Shavuos is the day that we receive the Torah. And so the Torah reading on Shavuos also is emphasizing the theme that Torah Shabbat Peh added, which is Matan Torah. Right? We read Matan Torah, B'nai Israel receiving the Torah. So both on Rosh Hashanah and on Shavuos, the Torah reading emphasizes the theme of the day that is only mentioned in Torah Shabbat Peh. So because it's not mentioned in Torah Shabbat Tav, we want to emphasize that this is also a theme, even if it's only mentioned in Torah Shabbat Peh. So once again, like our first answer, we are avoiding the problem again. Right? Once again, Akeidat Yitzchak isn't meant to be a message to ourselves. Rather, it's just emphasizing the theme of the day. The theme of the day is judgment, so we're going to read something that, also relates to judgment. So it's a message to ourselves only in the sense of putting us in that correct mindset that today is a Yom Hadin, a day of judgment. Okay. Third possible answer, which is one that I was just thinking about, is the concept of trial. Right? Abraham is going through the hardest trial probably that anyone can go through, to choose to agree to make this decision to kill his own son. And I think that could possibly be inspiring to ourselves, as we're trying to do tshuva, that if we feel, I'm trying to do tshuva for something I did, but I can maybe think to myself, it wasn't my fault. That was really, that was a really hard suffering that I went through. How was I supposed to overcome that and react differently? So maybe, seeing Abraham who was able to deal with a challenge that was so great and none of us have to go through, we can kind of say to ourselves, wow, if Abraham can overcome that challenge, if he can overcome that trial, how much more so should I be able to overcome my challenges, which are considerably smaller than Abraham's. So this kind of, turns on its head, right? How can Abraham be an inspiring message for ourselves if he was so great, if he was so perfect? And this answer is saying, that's exactly the point. The fact that Abraham was so great is what's inspiring to ourselves. If Abraham can do it, all the more so should I be able to do that. Should I be able to do tshuva as well? So just to review until now, so far we've discussed three possibilities for why we read Akeidat Yitzchak on Rosh Hashanah. The first we said is that it's a message to Hashem. That Hashem should, when we read Akeidat Yitzchak in Shul, Hashem should hear and remember everything that he promised to us. And he should show us mercy. The second we saw is that, again, it's not really so much a message to us, it's just emphasizing the theme of the day, the theme of judgment. And the last one we saw is that being in awe of Abraham is exactly the point. We should be in awe of Abraham, right? If Abraham can do it, if Abraham can, agree to slaughter his son and show that commitment to God, how much more so should we be able to overcome our smaller trials and do tshuva? So before we move to the fourth answer, I'll just open it up to you guys if you have any other ideas for why we read Akeidat Yitzchak on Rosh Hashanah.
Well, I don't have an idea about that, but I thought that it was just interesting that the two paragraphs before and after the Akeidat and Daily Shachrit are essentially the inverse of themselves. Like, that you were saying that one of them was, we're trying to kind of quell Hashem's anger, and one of them is trying to just show, well, Abraham didn't do this, and it's just kind of interesting how it's the inverse.
Explain.
Meaning, like, you had said to us that Abraham wasn't angry enough to kill his son, and he didn't do that, but that we're asking Hashem to quell his anger. It's just interesting how it's the opposite. I don't know.
How's that the opposite of the first paragraph?
That Abraham had too much rachamim on his son, and so he didn't do that, whereas Hashem, it made sense when I don't know. Whatever.
Right, but we're saying Abraham didn't have rachamim on his son, really. I mean, he was more loyal to Hashem. And we're saying just as Abraham suppressed his mercy for his son in order to be committed to God, we're asking that Hashem suppress his anger to us and show us mercy.
Right, fine.
Which is like a full interesting parallel.
I just thought on a lighter note, the ram's horn is a symbol. We blow the horn on Rosh Hashanah, and the ram's caught in the thicket in the story, so it's just that's a little connection.
Right, I mean, that's what the Sefer, our first source, the Sefer Akeidat, was pointing out. That's why we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, because it, brings us back to Akeidat Yitzchak, where we found, Abraham found the ram, and that horn from the ram is what we blow. Right.
It's like a perfect combination of Malchut, Zechron, and Shofar. It's all in one story. But you see Hashem is the Melech here, obviously, because he asked Abraham to sacrifice his son, and Abraham has no choice but to listen. And of course, Zechron, because it's Abraham, Shofar, because
That's cool. Also that strengthens our second answer. That it's like the theme of the day. It really brings in everything. That really brings in everything. That's cool. Okay. So now we'll move to our last answer. Okay. Our last answer is from Rabbi Norman Lamb. He says something I think that's really, really fascinating. He said he answers our question by changing our focus. He says that we should focus not on the greatness of the test itself, but on the incredibleness of Abraham's mindset. What does he mean by that? He quotes the Kotzker Rebbe, who, based on strange wording in the Psukim, he proves that Abraham's great act wasn't that he put Yitzchak on the Mizbeach, but the greatness of what Abraham did was that he took Yitzchak off the Mizbeach. Why I say that's really crazy. So let's kind of try to put ourselves into Abraham's mindset. Right? As we said before, think about what Abraham went through when he had to listen to Hashem to kill his own son. Right? He had been waiting for years and years and years to get a son. He finally gets his wish, and he has a son, and then he's told to kill him. And imagine what, Abraham had to go through in order to agree to that. He had to weigh both sides. He had to, should I be listening to God, or should I be, showing my love for my son, and I wouldn't possibly do this to him. And when he finally makes that impossible decision, he is, he's choosing God over his son. And a decision like that really changes you. You can't make a decision like that. You can't choose God over your own child without that changing you. As Rabbi Lamb puts it, once he had chosen between family and faith, between God and son, he would never be the same again. And now imagine, once he had made that decision, made that really life-changing decision of choosing God over his own son, now imagine what Avram went through when the angel told him, actually stop, you don't have to kill your son. We'll read it in Rabbi Lamb's word. I gave you the link to his article because it's a really amazing article, written really beautifully, and I highly encourage you all to read it in your spare time. We'll just read Abraham's reaction inside, source number 6. When now the angel suddenly told him to stay his hand, he in effect told him, Abraham, you gave up that boy's life too quickly. Morally, you already split the child's blood, and it was not really necessary. You marked yourself as a murderer in the name of a higher cause. And after all that, you are not even going to receive the reward of knowing that your sacrifice was a real one. He would have blamed Abraham for turning to God and saying, God, are you playing games with me? To be told to release Isaac at the last moment could very well have meant that Abraham, in his own eyes, would henceforth be the eternal fool. The angel's command not to sacrifice Isaac meant that Abraham must be prepared to embrace the role in history of a confused old man, rather than, as Kierkegaard called him, the Knight of God. So it was inhumanely difficult for Abraham to invalidate his past, to risk making his whole life illegitimate. How much easier and more natural to convince himself that the angel's voice was the temptation of his father love, or Satan, or his inner resistance to the divine command. So what Lamb is saying here is that when Abraham was told, don't kill your son, stop, that invalidated his whole justification for coming to this decision. Once he finally decided to listen to Hashem and to sacrifice his son as Hashem asked him, he justified his reasoning. He had to convince himself that he was totally right in doing this. And when Hashem tells him, actually don't, it kind of invalidates everything that he went through. And it's kind of putting him as this, as Rabbi said, as this confused old man, as someone, what kind of person decides to kill their own son in the name of God? And it kind of, invalidates everything he had thought. And anyone seeing this would see Abraham as this, as this confused old man. His whole reputation, his dignity, was put in danger by this change in what Hashem was asking of him. So it was an almost equally impossible decision for Abraham to agree to take Yitzchak off of the Mizbeach, because while it might have been impossible to agree to sacrifice his own son, it's almost as impossible or more to kind of, allow yourself to be seen as a fool in the eyes of the world, to give up your dignity like that. So why did Abraham agree then to do this? Why was he willing to be seen possibly as the eternal fool? Look at the last paragraph there that I have for you from Rabbi Lamb. Abraham did this. Why? Because Abraham was a Yirei Elohim. He was a God-fearing man. And a God-fearing man does not look at his own investment, to his own reputation, to his own sacrifice. He cares only about the will of God. The Kutzker was right. Binding Isaac on the altar was the act of Akeidat Yitzchak, the sacrifice of Isaac. Taking him off was the act of Akeidat Abraham, the sacrifice of Abraham. And so he's saying that Abraham listened to God because he's a Yirei Elohim. He fears God. And someone who truly fears God is not worried about their own dignity, their own reputation. They only care about listening to God, to following God. So when he ends up really powerfully, when Abraham puts Yitzchak on the Mizbeach, that is Akeidat Yitzchak. And when Abraham takes Yitzchak off the Mizbeach, that's Akeidat Abraham. He's sacrificing his own reputation, his own dignity, in the name of God, of being a Yirei Elohim, of someone And so Rabbi Lam explains this is why. You have a question?
Well, I have a comment, maybe totally off, but first of all, I think the fact that he left his servants behind, if you want to look at like human psychology, you might say, well, he knew he had to do it, but he wasn't totally comfortable or proud of what he was doing, so he didn't want them to be witness to it, so he left them. So, which sort of contradicts with this blind faith, number one.
That kind of shows also, though, his
humanity.
And how this was a really difficult decision for him, and even if, there's a little bit, it's not as like this and it's just blind faith, but it shows that it was a very difficult decision for him.
Right, so, I feel that, I don't know necessarily that I agree altogether with Rabbi Lam's conclusion.
I was also feeling like, to me it always felt like Avram must have been joyous to get a reprieve. Like that, the second part wasn't the challenge, that was the relief that I'm not going to have to go through with this. And to me it always felt like he was hoping all along that we're not going to do like the Molech and the Avodah Zarahs of the time and sacrifice our children. This is some kind of challenge, but it wouldn't end that way. So I also have a little trouble with the Rabbi Lam interpretation.
Right.
But maybe it's like pre-programming because we've heard the story interpreted, so many times.
And in terms of the confused old man, I think at the time, people were sacrificing their children. I don't know the history, but so the fact that maybe he didn't sacrifice, that was the confused part, because back then everybody thought it was like the best thing. So
it costs money for the generation.
Right.
It's not just for the people.
Right. So.
I concur with both of you are saying. What's interesting, our rabbi in the second day of Rosh Hashanah quoted this Patzka Rebbe. He didn't quote Rabbi Lam, but he quoted this exact piece, and I was totally astounded by it. Right? I had never having heard this before, but the way in which it did resonate for me was that one way in which I think Abraham can be viewed, like anachronistic, but a little bit is like as a little bit of a religious fundamentalist in doing what he's about to do. I mean, it may have taken him a few days to get there, but like sacrificing your own child in the name of God has a little bit of like in 2015, like religious fundamentalism to me. And if you're like that invested in something, so it was your whole life, then to have God say, you're wrong, sorry. Like I can see how that kind of feels like, oh my gosh, then what am I? Right? What am I if I'm not like totally committed to God?
I think it humanizes him. Because it's confusing. But if the primacy is Yiras Hashem, then you understand it. And it says, well, he went from one peak to a totally separate peak, or a trough. But it's two separate peaks, two angles, but tying them together is the fear of God. And part of the fear of God is when he told him not to do it. It says, I'm not going to do it now. What are people going to say? But, the same reason I'm going to do it is the same reason I'm not going to do it.
Right. I think that's kind of a response to you. I think it's so natural for us. Of course we think that when Avram told, actually I don't think it's that, of course he's probably happy. But I think what Rabbi Lam is doing is putting us in his mindset. Recognizing that Abraham, who was clearly such a Yirei Elohim, someone who so feared God, to even make that decision to, bring Yitzchak to the Mizbeach, he had to have fully convinced himself that was the right thing to do for him to even go through that. So it would be so natural to think that he was probably happy, but Rabbi Lam was kind of forcing us to enter his mindset a little bit and see it a little differently.
I think it was Rashi, but I'm not sure, and I once heard that it was Al Tas Lo Muluva, don't even touch the boy, don't even do anything. It's like man's human nature is that when we have something, we need to put it into physicality, that we have to make a mark, that we have it's a moment of inspiration and we need to act. I remember I heard it once in context at Rosh Hashanah that you have all these feelings of I'm going to change and I'm going to correct and I'm going to do tshuva, and then we need to put that into practice. So it was this battle against Avram. Avram, I know you need to make a mark. You invested so much in this. You made it up to Satan. You fought against the Satan. You got this far, and you need to make the mark. This is now your test. It becomes this test of fighting against your human nature. Of you became to this point where you felt that you hit your climax of Avodas Hashem and being able to serve Hashem, but you can't. And now this is your word of don't make a mark, don't touch the boy, don't put that into physicality.
When you're like, okay, this is how I'm going to serve God, and then you're told not to do that, and you're left with like no concrete way to do that. Okay.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
I always found it surprising that it was an angel that said don't do it, rather than Hashem directly. Hashem originally told him to go. Why does Hashem then send an angel? Well, he could, like Rabbi Lam says, it's easier and natural to convince us how the angel voice with condition of his father's Rahman. So I always found that interesting why it's an angel.
It's a good question.
Definitely taught this. Yeah, I think it's a good question. I wonder if you could, like, how Ariane was saying, maybe it's giving Avram more of a choice in a way, saying that, hearing it from the angel.
Or it's casting you in a better light if you listen, because it's right that like if it was so hard to listen, then it's even harder if you're not being spoken to directly by that.
Sure, maybe they say only been great.
If you're trying to do with this one.
Right. Okay, so just to extend this to Tshuva, so Raylan explains that, this is why we're reading Akeidat Yitzchak on Rosh Hashanah, because Tshuva, he says, implies the invalidation of one's ego, the confession that one's past cannot and will not be justified. So when Abraham agreed, not to slaughter his son, he was saying that his willingness to do that, to sacrifice his own son, that whole justification, all of that was null and void. He was totally wrong, and he was able to submit to this crushing of his ego. He was able to say that he was wrong in coming to this decision in the name of following God, of fearing God. And that's what we're doing when we're doing tshuva also, that we're saying to ourselves, I might think that I'm totally right, the way I'm living my life seems to be right to me, and you justify it, when you do the wrong thing over and over again, you come to justify it to yourself and convince yourself that you're doing the right thing, and this is the way to lead your life. But when you think about things, when you think about how you really want to fear God and serve God, you have to kind of invalidate yourself and be willing to admit that you are wrong, and to possibly be seen as, maybe not so extreme as a fool, but to be seen as wrong, like Abraham was willing to do. So what Rabbi Lam was saying is, we started off saying, how can this be a message? How can Akeidat Yitzchak be a message to ourselves? So Rabbi Lam answers that question for us by shifting our mindset. We're not focusing on the greatness of Abraham's act, that he was willing to sacrifice his son Yitzchak, but we're focusing on Abraham's mindset, that he was able to, completely change something from what he was totally convinced was correct, and shift his mindset because he knew that this was God, what God was asking of him. And that, I think, that idea of being able to, not be stubborn in your ways and to change your mindset to follow God is something that I think that's much more plausible to aspire to. So to recap, our first impression of Akeidat Yitzchak was that it was a message to ourselves to inspire us to do tshuva. I think that's how it's commonly seen. But that was confusing to us, we said, because something that's too perfect can actually be dispiriting rather than inspiring. So we explored different possibilities of what Akeidat Yitzchak can be teaching us. We thought it could be a message to Hashem, just emphasizing the theme of the day. We said that, it could actually be the point that Abraham was so great. Abraham can do it, we can too. And our last answer, Rabbi Lam, is really the most straightforward. That yes, like the Sefer HaChinuch said, Akeidat Yitzchak is a message to ourselves. It's meant to inspire us to tshuva, but he's shifting our focus to Abraham's mindset. That he was able to shift his mindset in order to make it align with what God was asking of him. So as we start off the new year, I hope this brings new meaning to our greeting of Shana Tova. Rabbi Lam points out that Shana, that shorash, means both to repeat and to change. So I wish for us that as we continue on our path of tshuva, that we both know what to repeat for the coming year, what we've done right over the year and we should continue to do, and what we need to change for the coming year, just as Abraham was able to change his mindset in order to serve God to his highest potential. I hope for us that we are able to